All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into the shadows of human interaction. We're breaking down a source that lays out 30 psychological techniques, all designed for influence and persuasion.
You know, right off the bat, the source makes this really bold promise to get past all that flashy, clickbaity stuff you see online and focus only on the methods that are actually backed by science.
But, and this is super important, it immediately hits you with a critical warning. These are powerful tools. If you misuse them, you could seriously undermine trust and, honestly, just wreck your relationships.
So we're talking about 30 different techniques here. And to really get a handle on how they all work, we're going to group them into a few key themes. Let's kick things off with the absolute foundation of any kind of influence, and that's connection.
Okay, so our first big theme here is all about building that foundation of connection. Because, think about it, before you can influence anyone, you've got to build some rapport, right? You have to make the whole interaction feel smooth and personal.
Okay, one of the simplest but wow, super effective methods is what's called name dropping. Think about it. You're in a packed room, a ton of noise, and suddenly you hear your name. It just cuts right through everything and grabs your attention, doesn't it? It's such a simple way to make any conversation feel personal.
And in that same vein, you've got mirroring. This is where you subtly copy someone's body language, their posture, maybe their hand gestures. It subconsciously sends this signal that, hey, you're in sync, you're on the same wavelength. And that simple act can make them feel way more comfortable and at ease.
All right, now if you want to take this a step further, there's a technique called pacing and leading. So here's how it works. First, you match their style, their tone, how fast they're talking. That's the pacing part. Once you've built that rapport, you can then gradually guide the conversation where you want it to go. And that's the leading part.
Okay, so once that rapport is there, the next set of tricks is all about actively shaping perception. We're talking about influencing how people see reality, how they value things, and even the choices they make.
Now here's a classic. You've definitely seen this in marketing and sales. It's the scarcity principle. This one tabs directly into our FOMO, our fear of missing out. By just making something seem rare or like it's in limited supply, you instantly make it feel more valuable, more desirable.
Yeah, this kind of tactic is 100% about creating urgency. It puts the pressure on you to make a snap decision, right? And it often makes you bypass all the careful thought you'd normally put into it.
And then you've got something called the halo effect. This is a funny thing our brains do. We tend to let one positive thing about someone, say they're really well dressed or they speak very eloquently, create this halo over them. We just automatically assume they're probably good at a bunch of other totally unrelated things too.
So check this out. Here we have two really powerful ways to frame a request. On the left, you've got anchoring. This is where you start with a really high number, like a crazy high price, to make what you actually want to ask for seem way more reasonable. And then on the right, there's the contrast principle. This is where you show an expensive option first, so the next one you show looks like an amazing deal, just by comparison.
And that brings us to the most direct techniques. And, like the source keeps warning us, these are the ones that can get really manipulative. They are specifically designed to get compliance, to get you to say yes.
Okay, now look at these two strategies for getting a yes. They're like complete opposites. On one side, you have foot in the door. You start with a tiny, easy-to-say yes to request, and that builds commitment for a bigger one later. But on the other side, you have door in the face. This is where you do the exact opposite. You start with a massive request that you know they'll reject. That way, when you follow up with your smaller, real request, they're much more likely to agree to it.
Loss aversion. Man, this is a seriously powerful psychological trigger. The source really hammers this home. We are fundamentally more motivated to avoid losing something than we are to gain something of equal value. That fear of loss is just a much bigger driver of our behavior.
So when you frame a decision like this around what could be lost, we could miss out on a big opportunity. It can really light a fire under people to act fast. The whole focus shifts from what you might gain to what you absolutely stand to lose if you don't act right now.
Which brings us to what is, honestly, probably the most important part of this whole discussion, the ethics of it all. What do we do with this knowledge?
Yeah, the source is really clear on this point. These strategies, they live in a moral gray area. They're designed to be subtle, to fly under the radar, and that is exactly what makes them so potentially deceptive.
And the source wraps up with this one last, super direct warning. It doesn't sugarcoat it at all. It calls these techniques what they are, dark and manipulative, and it just urges extreme caution if you ever think about using them.
So, as we wrap this up, it all kind of boils down to this one critical question for us to think about. In our own lives, where do we draw that line between harmless influence and actual manipulation? And maybe even more important, how do we get better at spotting it when it's being used on us?